where you're joining us from and what organization you represent, if you would like. We'll give folks a few more minutes to arrive.
We still have just a few people who are making their way in.
Okay. We'll take one more minute. Awesome. How are we looking, Ashley?
Just a few folks just coming in yet, but I think you can go ahead and get started.
Okay.
And in the meantime, great. Everybody can pop in the chat their introductions.
Awesome. Welcome. All right, so we will go ahead and get started and really excited to welcome all of you. Thank you for joining American Farmland Trust today for our webinar on soil health for vegetable and cut flower systems. So my name is Amanda Cather. I'm the Mid-Atlantic Senior Program Manager for AFT, and I'm also a pastured livestock producer based in Maryland, and I use she, her pronouns. I'm also really grateful to introduce my colleagues Ashley Brucker and Rachel McDonald from AFT who are joining us this morning. I'm really excited for our conversation this morning with our discussion leaders about soil health and vegetable and cut flower systems. So as service providers, you are all aware that soil health can have multiple benefits for farm production, resilience, and environmental stewardship, but it can be challenging to make sure that soil health management doesn't become just another task for farmers, but that instead it's integrated into the way we think about our farm operations. So really excited to have this conversation today and want to say as we get started that these webinars are sponsored by a conservation innovation grant from Pennsylvania NRCS that was focused on providing peer-to-peer support for farmers and farm service providers in order to deepen soil health knowledge and technical assistance through a series of virtual and in-person learning circles in partnership with Penn State Women in Ag Network, PASA Sustainable Agriculture, and I see Sarah Bainala from PASA here today with us, and the Pennsylvania Soil Health Coalition. And joining us today from Pennsylvania Soil Health Coalition and Stroudwater Research Center is Lisa Blazure, an experienced conservation professional who advocates for improving soil health to achieve water quality goals and enhance the economic viability of agriculture. And we are going to have lots of time for questions after Lisa and Steve talk with us today. So please put them in the chat, and Ashley will keep an eye on that chat and get them to our discussion leaders. In the meantime, keep yourself muted if you're not speaking. Cameras can be on or off, and we are really excited to get started. So I'm going to hand it off to Lisa to take it away. Thanks for being here, Lisa.
Yeah, happy to be here. I'll get my screen up and loaded here. And we'll get started. All right, is everyone seeing that? Is it coming through okay? All right. So we decided to kind of just kick off this two-part series with just setting that foundation so we're all kind of on the same page. We're going to do a real quick, probably 10-minute overview of those soil health principles. So we're going to dive right into that. And this concept of soil health, right, is so intricately involved with those management decisions that are made on the farm. So as you can see in this slide, those soil characteristics, the way those soils function and behave are directly related to those management decisions that are being made on a seasonal basis, an annual basis, and then that kind of decade-long approach as well. So I'm sure all of you on the call are intimately familiar with these four main principles. Sometimes in this soil health world, you'll hear 5 or 6 principles discussed as well. Sometimes this under diversity, this integrating livestock back onto the land gets pulled out as its own separate principle. But for NRCS planning purposes, we lump that animal livestock into the maximizing diversity principle. So we're going to spend a little bit of time just kind of going through these principles and how specific elements of these principles you can seed into those conversations that you're having with the farmers, right? Because you're not going to go out to the farm and just start a conversation and start rattling off these 4 principles and all the key things, right? You're going to be visiting a farm, having that conversation. You're going to be easing that into it. And you yourself want to be intimate with kind of the foundations of all these principles. So you can kind of pick and pluck different pieces of knowledge that you have to work that into the system. So I'm going to jump right into what I think is one of the most important of the principles, and that's keeping that living plant growing throughout the year, as many months as possible. And this is where those cover crops into the system really play that key role, right? Because it's these living plants that are going to drive that biology, drive that microbial cycle in our soils. It's a great way to add carbon into the system. We'll dive into that a little bit. In terms of nutrient management and planning, right? Even the best nutrient management plans, we probably still have a little bit of leftover nitrogen that's in the field at the end of the season. So we get those cover crops in the system. We're going to scavenge those leftover nutrients, hold on to them for the next growing season. And it's really critical with enhancing soil structure. So it's that living root system, right? Plants and a few of the algae are the only things on Earth that have the ability to capture that sunlight energy and transform it into the basis of that food chain that the rest of the system functions on. And they're doing that through that photosynthetic process and developing those simple sugars. And a lot of those simple sugars are pumped down into the root system and leach out through the root system, and we call those root exudates. And these root exudates and this interface between the roots and the soil is really where that magic happens. A lot of that microbial activity is going to be concentrated right along that living root zone, right? So here's a photo kind of illustrating what those root exudates look like coming out of those root hairs. This is under a microscopic condition, but these compounds are the way that these plants communicate with their soil microbes, how they kind of manipulate that soil environment right around the root zone. They can manipulate the pH, that pH maybe even 2 points lower right along that root zone than the rest of the soil profile. And they've got all of these micro communications that are constantly happening in this interchange between the plant roots and these root exudates. So why would a plant go to the effort to produce these root exudates, right? We know we've got a high concentration of soil bacteria that is located along these plant roots. They're feeding on those sloughing root cells. They're feeding on these sugars So the plant root exudates are feeding the bacteria. We've got predators in the system. So those predators are coming along, eating that bacteria. And as they're eating that bacteria, they're excreting ammonium form of nitrogen. All this extra nitrogen that they're eating that they don't need gets excreted and is immediately plant available form of nitrogen. And then we've got mycorrhizae fungi in the system, right? And that plant is feeding the mycorrhizae fungi. That's communicating with that. It's telling it to go out, get whatever nutrients it needs during that plant growth cycle. It's extracting water. It's bringing those nutrients back to the plant, right? So it's this whole cyclical system. And I really like this part of it. I'm a biologist. I went to school for biology. So I really get into all these nitty-gritty details. When you're working with a farmer, they may or may not be interested. Every once in a while, you're going to find a farmer that wants to go into the nitty-gritty. But what a farmer does understand or want to learn about is, how do I access those organic pool of nutrients, right? We know there's a tremendous amount of nitrogen and phosphorus available in the soils. So this whole mineralization of this organic material to supply those nutrients back to the crop, that's where you can kind of draw in the farmer to have that conversation about cycling those nutrients and accessing those organic nutrients and driving the system and having these predators in the system so that the systems are working in sync, right? And ultimately, as we build up these systems, they can start cutting back on some fertilizer inputs. The other great thing when you're working with the farmers is to go out and just dig some holes, right? You can learn so much by just having that spade with you, walking the fields, digging some holes, looking at that soil structure, digging up some plant roots, shaking that soil off the plant roots, and looking at that rhizosphere, right? Seeing how much of that soil is stuck onto those roots, like this picture on the screen here of this like 8-day-old oat seedling, and you can see the activity that we've got on the roots. So this is something that you guys can do with the farmers out there to talk about soil aggregation, and then bring the biology piece in, because we need those biological glues. We need the glomalin and those fungal filaments to kind of wrap around these soil particles to create this good soil structure. So you can have that conversation with the farmer. The other thing they're probably interested in is about water infiltration, right? And reducing the runoff, reducing that risk for erosion. So this is an illustration comparing two different fields and two different management systems on either side of the road. We can see the long-term continuous no-till cover crop field on the right. There's no ponded water. All of that water is drained, and the farm directly across the road that's got some tillage, some tobacco in the rotation. We've got that ponding water, right? So this is a visual thing that the farmer can see after a rain of where the water's flowing through his fields and where it's laying. So improving that soil structure can go hand in hand with that infiltration question as well, right? And we don't want that ponding water, because that's when we get more of our disease and pathogen issues, when we're in those anaerobic type conditions where the water's ponding. The other thing that's going to resonate with the farmer for this principle is better soil structure. And especially when we're working with dairy farms, they've got a lot of heavy equipment, a lot of multiple passes across these fields throughout that season with harvest and spreading manure. So this soil structure is something that the farmer can directly relate to as well, right? So again, tying in that importance of that living plant system to feed the biology to get this better soil structure. So you're avoiding that compaction in the wet area and rutting up those fields. So the other thing that farmers really resonate with is, how do they increase their soil organic matter level? That's something that is a universal goal for almost every farm that we're going to work with. They recognize the value of increasing organic matter. And we're finding that having that living plant in the system and those liquid sugars, those root exudates, is really what's going to drive that long-term, deeper soil organic matter levels, right? So the carbon in that root exudate, it's 5 times more likely to end up in that long-term soil organic matter pool. So again, we can approach the angle in this conversation with, you know, what's the best way to improve organic matter on the farm? Principle number 2, we're going to keep that soil covered. So this is another great opportunity. If the farmer's got time to walk the fields with you, go take a walk in the fields, right? Go look for this soil crusting that you may see. Look for soil, bare soil that's been splashed up onto the leaves like we see in this lower picture. The other thing that you can sometimes see are these, what we call these rock pedestals. So this picture on the bottom part of the screen, you can see where rock fragments covered the surface, that soil was protected, and we lost all that erosion where that soil wasn't protected and that soil was exposed. So a lot of times it's hard to see that sheet erosion out in the field, but if you can find examples of these rock pedestals. So keeping that soil covered, you can have the conversation about protecting those bare soils from that impact of the raindrop. You can talk about beneficial insects and creating those habitats, moderating that soil temperature and soil moisture, weed control. So whether that's old residue on top or the cover crops, terminate it in the spring. And then also some of that surface residue also does contribute to the organic matter levels in the soil. So keeping that soil covered, right? For our soils to be that high functioning, it's this really kind of sweet spot Goldilocks zones with soil temperature and soil moisture, right? So we want to keep those soils between about 86 degrees and 95 degrees. So this is another quick tool that you can carry with you, that soil temperature, and just show the farmer the difference in those hot, bare, exposed soils, what the temperatures look like versus soils under cover. Or go to the edge of the field, you know, at the hedgerow where there's some cover to show that example. But again, understanding and teaching about that importance of retaining that soil moisture, especially when we've got dry, droughty conditions, how valuable that moisture is, keeping those soils covered and cool. Principle number 3, we're going to reduce disturbance. For a lot of years, we focused primarily on physical disturbance, but we're also now understanding the impact of these chemical disturbances, especially our salts. A lot of our fertilizers are higher salt content, and we're seeing that those salts are particularly damaging to this whole soil microbiome as well, right? So some of the impacts that we see with tillage, it's physically going to change that soil structure. It's going to pulverize those soil aggregates. They know it's going to be a higher risk for soil erosion, that crusting. The other thing to emphasize with that soil crusting is beyond just lack of water infiltration and more runoff, it's preventing our soils, those soils from breathing. Those soils need to respire that carbon dioxide, and we need oxygen getting down to the roots. So when you're walking a field and we've got that crusting layer, it's not allowing those soils to breathe like they need to have that good gas exchange and fun, right? And then that tillage is going to destroy those night crawler burrows that we work so hard and destroy that mycorrhizal fungi network. Here's a great example from Christine Jones that she saw in the presence of high nitrogen fertilizer in oat fields and the absence of nitrogen fertilizer. And you can see in the picture on the left that high nitrogen system, those plant roots didn't need to put the energy into developing this relationship with the soil biology, right? So that rhizosphere, those roots are really bare. Whereas when there's not that inorganic form of those fertilizers, then we're going to be pumping those root exudates, and it's going to be building those relationships, and we're going to get all those other tertiary soil health benefits that we get from really allowing these plants and the soil microbes to interact as they evolved. All right, final principle is going to be increasing diversity into the system. And there's a lot of ways that you can bring this conversation around as well. We're starting to see some opportunities to get some more crops in the rotation. So a lot of folks in that outside of the dairy system, if they're in that corn, soybean, they oftentimes have that small grain in the system as that third crop. I'm starting to see more of this grain sorghum or milo grain being grown in Pennsylvania. There's some more folks experimenting instead of double crop beans, perhaps after small grains, some sunflowers. So some more sunflower crops that are being grown. So in the rotation themselves, there's the possibility to increase diversity, certainly cover crop mixes, and our best window is going to be after that small grain. So that summertime window to get mixes in. And then, of course, that whole principle of integrating animals back onto the landscape, because magical things happen to transform those soils when we get animals back on to the land. All right, so in conclusion, those four main principles, if we're looking at lumping them together, this minimizing disturbance and maximizing soil cover really boils down to protecting that soil, building those soil aggregates, protecting that organic matter. And then these other two principles about maximizing continuous living roots and maximizing diversity are really about feeding and fueling the soil biology, right? And to keep that healthy functioning system going. Okay, so that was high level, quick overview. And we're going to transition now to kind of the meat of the program. So I'm going to turn this over to Steve Groff. Steve is located down in southern Lancaster County. And Steve is constantly at the cutting edge of so many aspects of agriculture. So I remember years ago when I started the conservation district, hearing Steve talk about the system that he's worked out with no-till tomatoes and pumpkins, right, Steve? That's kind of where you started. You've evolved to include a lot of the other squash varieties, and now you continue to evolve into perfecting that no-till hemp production, right, for CBD oil, right? So Steve is an excellent educator. We're really privileged to have him in Pennsylvania because he does have this vegetable production system and a lot of this experience that's pretty unique in this realm of no-till and soil health. So Steve, happy to have you on the program, and I'll turn it over to you now.
Well, thank you so much, Lisa. And didn't Lisa do a great job, everybody? I thought so. It was a great way to get this start out, to provide a foundation. And, you know, here we are, we're all excited about, you know, soil health and what can be done. But how do you communicate to those that you influence? And that's really the topic today. So I'm going to start with more of the foundational principles of communication, because if we don't know how to communicate, you know, it's pretty much our waste of time. And you guys are already influencers, so you understand that. But in the context of agriculture, I see way too much where, you know, I as a farmer, where I'm sitting there listening to somebody that's just not connecting. They just don't know how to connect. And you know, we think about we wanting to promote the soil health movement, and now more so in some of the more challenging aspects like vegetables and flower production. It's important that we communicate well, and that's what I want to start with. And I'll go into some more specific details, and then we'll wind up with some questions. But I'll just add to a little bit of where I'm coming from. I do have 4 acres of high tunnel heirloom tomatoes, 100% no-till, 100% cover crop. I have a living cover crop in there. We actually installed overhead irrigation to every once in a while to keep that alive. And the result of that this year, and I'm far enough into the season to tell you that we will not be using any pesticides, fungicides, insecticides, you name it, not even the organic ones, which some people don't know there's organic pesticides, but trust me, there are. So we're doing it through nutrition, feeding the plants to have them naturally resist disease and insects. It's not 100% perfected, but this will be, I felt like I've incrementally went in that step because I want to only apply to my tomatoes what I could personally consume. And that's a pretty high goal. I'm just about there. So that just gives you a little bit of a context. But reeling back to our topic today, based on what Lisa has just shared with us, I just want to share a few things here on how do we communicate that. So I don't have PowerPoints, but get your old school pens and papers ready. Your new school, get your computer ready to go there and take some notes. And here's the first thing that I want to provide is the foundation for my talk today. Everybody communicates, but few connect. Everybody communicates, but few connect. Let's talk about connecting, because that is what makes the difference in what we're talking about. How do you connect with your audience? And I know we have different audiences represented here, different influencers, but how do you connect? I want you to think about that yourself. Are you connecting well? Do you know how to connect with your audience? Do you even know who your audience is? We're not going to go over that exercise because you guys can do that. But really it comes down to how do we change hearts and minds? Now, I'm not going to get into a psychology course here, but if we want to be effective, we have to understand a few things. So we're really changing hearts and minds. And how do you make the case to farmers about the value of best management practices? Lisa gave us a few examples, walking out in the field with them. But I got to tell you, you want to have a good relationship with the farmer before you tell him everything that he or she's doing is wrong. That doesn't go well. That doesn't connect well. So you try to cultivate the farmers who are willing to learn, who want to learn, and make that connection somehow. Now, here's a little practical thing. For those of you who may not come up in agriculture or grew up in agriculture, every single farmer wants to know about the weather. It's a daily thing. And if you want to really connect well with a farmer, like if it just rained, ask them how much it rained. And then if you don't already have a rain gauge, put one out and you can tell them, oh, I had 2/10 last night, or I had, a 1/4 inch. Or if you want to really impress them, say I had 12/100. Not all people take it to that. I'm just using an example. You want to connect, talk about the weather. And that's, again, a fundamental thing that you need to understand about the culture of agriculture in order to connect. And if you do some of the little nuances, you'll get in. And as you all know, it's difficult to do this. So these are some little tips of the trade. So the other thing I want to say is you're kind of like a marketer. You're trying to market soil health. So learn some of the, I'll say, tactics of what marketers do. How do marketers connect in order to sell? You're not essentially selling, but yet you kind of are. So marketing requires consistent creativity. Marketing requires consistent creativity. That might be another bullet point for you. And here's another one that really helped me. Whisper to the influencers and let them magnify your message. All of you can probably think of one or two people who, they are respected in the community. They're good at what they do and they're respected. I'm encouraging you to spend your most time with them if that's possible, because they will amplify your message. Don't be going around trying to spend most of your time with the naysayers. That is pretty much a waste of time. I don't have time for it. I have some people, they'll basically, well, do cover crops pay? And I will flat out get their attention and say, no, they don't. And then we've all of a sudden set the stage for a conversation. And then I'll soon find out, where are they coming from? And if they're trying to prove that they don't pay, they're right. If they want to prove that they do pay, they're also right. But you have to have someone that is committed and passionate about that. So again, I'm going to speak a little bit from my experience, but I think we're all busy people. Spend your time with the influencers and let them magnify your message, or enable them to have field days or whatever, or help them to do a PowerPoint, or help them to do a blurb or blog or whatever. All those little things can be of help. So peer pressure in agriculture is huge. Peer pressure is huge. What will the neighbors think? What will my friends think? That is very significant, and you need to understand that. And so it's not something that you're just going to, magically push through. You just have to understand that. That's why I say focus on the influencers, because that will kind of eliminate that. The next thing is, what is catalyst for change? What causes people to not farm the way their grandpa did, the way their dad or mother did, the way their neighbors do? What causes that? It's interesting. I'm old enough now to observe almost every single successful farmer out there that is into the soil health hook, line, and sinker. They either had one of two things. They either had a crisis on their farm, maybe their lives, but I'll say a crisis on their farm, or they had an epiphany. And sometimes those are together, sometimes they're not. So look for that. And I will challenge you. Ask yourself, why are you here today? Why are you involved in soil health? What is your, it might not be a crisis so much with this crowd today, but what's your epiphany? Just think about that. And that's something you can share. That's something you can connect with. But find that out when you're talking with the people that you're influencing. What caused them to be even interested in soil health? And you understand where I'm going here? We're trying to put a fundamental foundation up here so that we can get to the nitty gritty. So that's just maybe a little homework for you if you don't think of it right away. For me, it all started with trying to close ditches on my sloping fields. It was a pain to have to take my tractor and loader out and close ditches so I could harvest my crops. That was 1982, a long time ago. No concept of soil health. The term wasn't even coined. I frankly didn't care about the Chesapeake Bay, and which was what we most thought at that time. That's the watershed we're in here. Having said that, that's what was my crisis moment. The epiphany happened 3 years later when I was no-tilling. I switched to no-till. Okay, 3 years later, I saw the coulters of my planter. At that point, we had frame-mounted coulters, was sinking into the hubs. It was going in 4 or 5 inches. I thought, how is that possible? Because I was under the impression I had to plow every couple of years. That was my epiphany when I literally asked someone, why is the ground getting more mellow? And they said, because you haven't disturbed the earthworm channels and the decaying root channels from previous crops. And I'm like, that makes sense. Now, can you believe that simple thing was an epiphany? For me, it was. It's my story. So that's when I thought, oh, now I got to leverage this. I got to maximize to try to, how can I take advantage of this, what I just learned? And so that's really what helped me. So what is your epiphany? What is your farmer's epiphany? What is the crisis? I mean, we know stories of other people out there. I'm not going to go into them now. So how do you maximize the potential for engaging your audience? And I'm going to caution to go in there and just hand out prescriptions right away. You have to make sure they understand the fundamental principles that Lisa so eloquently laid out. And sometimes you got to hear these 5 or 10 times to start to get them if you're new to it. But if you understand the principles, you will then begin to implement the practices. You will know how to implement those practices. And that is, again, so easy to slip into. Everyone wants to know, how can I fix this? What can I do for this? What can I do for that? All these are great questions, but make sure that they understand the principles first, or you'll just be babysitting them for the rest of their lives. We want people to understand principles so they can figure it out. And then we can start to talking about practices that may work in the context of principles. The other thing is to, and I felt this to be effective, is to use, allegories of nature. Understand how to make nature work for you and not against you. We've been taught in agriculture, you wake up in the morning, it's what am I going to kill today? What insect is out there? What can I kill it with? What weed is out there? What can I kill the weed? Everything, kill, 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 kill. That's been our culture. And that's why I'm saying that you have to have a fundamental shift to how can I provide more life into my operation? Well, cover crops, less tillage, less disturbance, all these things. And then that starts to shape our practices. So it's not what am I going to kill? It's how can I put more life? Now, again, it's not like flipping a switch. Just because you believe what I said is not going to magically make all the insects leave. No, there's a lot that we're all still collectively learning to do that. But once a farmer starts to see, I'm going to say this specifically, signs of life, when they notice life on their farm and they notice what it is, they'll begin to open up to what is the next step. So for me personally, my goals on my farm is to keep the soil covered with living roots year round. It's that simple. In order to do that, you don't till. So that's implied. So that's what I'm trying to do in my farm. Now, what if you're growing carrots? What if you're growing potatoes? What if you're growing some things like tiny, small seeded flowers? Well, there's where that kind of compromise, if you will, can come in. So the thing that's important to know here, and maybe I need to back up a second, you don't just go no-till. You don't just throw on cover crops and expect miracles. We always focus on the successes out there, but any successful farmer has their share of failures. And I like to say, if you're not failing at all, you're probably not trying quite hard enough. But on the flip side, don't make your failures make you go broke. And the other thing I want to say too, and this is maybe back to context here, but you can't buy soil health. It doesn't come in a jug. It doesn't come in a bag. Now there's products that will help with your soil health, implementation of everything, but it's management of the farmer. My organic matter went from 2.2% to almost 6% now, not because so much of what my inputs were, but my management. This is another thing that you want to communicate. So I would also say too, and this is kind of meant to be thought-provoking and funny, but it's kind of true, that soil health, cover crops, no-till make good farmers better and bad farmers worse. The reason I say that is it's management, like I alluded to. It's the management of that, because I've seen, very, very bad failures, and people, accuse me of telling them to do something that, caused them to fail. This is going to happen, but you always try to dig a little deeper in a respectful way. And I always, when I get those calls sometimes, I'm like, well, do you see any way that could have worked? And usually you'll elicit some sort of positivity out of it. So again, how do you face, criticism? How do you face negativity? And those of you who know my personality, I tend to be very optimistic and jovial. And so I kind of roll with that. Like I said earlier, when people say something didn't work, I said, yep, you're right. You're right. It doesn't. And then we go off that. And that's, again, I'm going to say you have to go off your personality and how you talk and communicate with people. But the thing about farming is the fear of losing yields is a powerful marketing tool for all these inputs that are out there. And I'm not against inputs, but I think generally speaking, they're oversold and cause a lot more side effects than we would desire. So this is, again, some headwinds that we face in the soil health movement. And I would say, even, I'm not going to get into this, government policies don't always, kind of really help us. So I'm just going to leave it at that. But how do you start facing this whole dilemma of, well, how much tillage is okay? Are you a fanatic, no-till pure? Do you have to be 100% pure? And my answer is no. I am on my farm, but that's for me. I have arranged my cover crops, my cash crops to accommodate the system for me. But like I said, I don't grow carrots. I don't grow potatoes. So how do you do that? I'm going to list here 5 different things that can help answer this question. Then I do want to get a little more specific. So the first thing is education. Learn all you can about your audience and what their needs are and what their challenges are, and spend time with them. Again, as far as those of you who are not grown up in the culture of agriculture, go to agriculture events. I know this sounds like maybe not relevant, but trust me, go to the local county fair or whatever that is. Go to some public, like a public sale, an auction. I remember I was at a public auction of a farmer, and the seed corn salesman, the Pioneer seed corn salesman was there. Now he wasn't a farmer, he's a full-time seed salesman. I said, "Why are you here?" He goes, "I'm here to see my customers on a non-sales basis." See, that builds trust, like he's one of us. So whatever that means for you, look for those opportunities to mingle with the type of people that you associate with. So learn all you can, because at the end of the day, I could sit here, give you 10 hours of prescriptions of different things, but it's going to come from you working with your clients. That's where most of this is going to come out of, because there's 1,000 different ways to do the same thing sometimes. A little exaggeration, but you get my point. There really are no exact prescriptions of how to farm, how to do soil health, how to do regenerative agriculture. But let's go back to those fundamental principles that Lisa talked about. It has to fall underneath them. And here's another thing. It's the tagline I write in my book when I sign it: stay curious and keep learning. That applies to me. That's who I am. But I'm just challenging you to stay curious and keep learning. Is going to serve you a lot. The number 2 thing here is to have a mentor. That includes you. Those of you who are in this, whatever you're influencing, who is your mentor? Who do you draw from? It could be several. I have several. But you need to have someone who is a little farther ahead of what you want your goals to be. That's who your mentor is. When people ask, well, who should be my mentor? It's someone who's doing what you desire to do, that is really there already, that you can go to. And it could be a group. There's all kinds of social media groups out there, Facebook groups, WhatsApp groups. I'm in several of them. They're always very helpful. So have a mentor. Number 3, this has to do more with cover crops, but treat your cover crops like you do your cash crops. Again, sounds simplistic, but if you have the tenacity to get your cover crops planted on time and the right species, just like you do with your cash crops, you're going to stand a much better chance of success. And this is where you want to help the people who are really interested in cover crops, help them understand how to get the right prescription for their farm. Number 4, do you know how to manage your soils in the way they were designed to function? It's a loaded statement. Do you know how to manage your soils in the way they were designed to function? It's different if you're on sandy soil versus heavy clay soil versus stony rocky soil. There's a huge difference. That's why I'm saying prescriptions, they're just not consistent. You're going to have to figure out, even from your field to field on your farm. And this is why I keep emphasizing that you have to understand what the principles are so that you fit the prescriptions in underneath that model. Now, here's another one, number 5, that not many people do. And because of a lot of research I've done on my farm, I found it to be very helpful. And this is simply the question is, have you calibrated your soils? What do I mean by that? have you grown any cash crops without any amendments, without any fertilizer or anything? Now, obviously, if you're growing a high value crop like tomatoes, you may only want to do that in 5 plants or maybe 1 plant. I don't know what it means to you. But, you know, we're talking about specialty crops here. And again, this is kind of only for the people who are really, they're already there. And they want to take it, what is in their soil? What's in their field? And that's why I say, have you calibrated your fields in a fertility standpoint? So I'm just going to throw that one out there. It's kind of like a bonus, because whenever you give points, you're supposed to give an odd number, and I didn't have the 5th one, so I thought that's a good one with the 5th one. So anyway, I think it's a good one though, by the way. So okay, I have done that, and I have found that I don't need as much nitrogen on corn, for example, as I thought. I've done it for oats. I've done it for wheat. I've done it for a couple things, just a little spot. Doesn't take much. So that's why I want to mention it. Okay, tillage. See, that kind of sounds like an evil word here in the context of soil health. And I'm just going to say that tillage is a tool. It's a tool. Anything that can do good, any tool can be overused. And trust me, it has. It got us the Dust Bowl. But also, you know, we broke the prairie with it. So that's just a little history lesson. But I'm going to say this. This is the fundamental principle I operate on when I'm consulting with people. You have to earn the right to do tillage. You have to earn the right to do tillage. And I think that's just an important concept to have. So anytime there's a, you know, it's like, that's what I have. And sometimes it simply is the farmer doesn't have no-till equipment. It's too expensive. I get that. But can you use cover crops? Anytime you have a 4-week window of nothing in cash crop, you should have a cover crop planted in there if it's during the growing season. That's one thing. And, you know, if you are growing, I kept using carrots as an example. By the way, I have seen successful strip till carrots in France. It can be done, but I'm just going to leave it there. I can show you a picture if you want me to. It can be done, but a little hard to dig potatoes without tillage at commercial scale. Just saying. But, you know, Google Brendan Rocky from Colorado. He's a large-scale potato farmer that, you know, as soon as the potatoes are done, he's planting a cover crop in there to rebuild that soil. And that's what I'm talking about. You have to earn the right to do tillage. And I appreciate a guy by the name of Jonathan Keller with Penn Valley Organic. He does a lot of soil amendments and so forth. He's an organic farmer. And he said, to earn the right to till, you have to have your cash crop or your cover crop planted the same day you do tillage. Now, probably ain't going to happen every time, but I love that statement. And that's what I'm talking about. You just never leave your soil without something growing in it. So, you know, again, these are fundamental principles for using tillage. But then again, do you have to till? Can you be less aggressive in your situation? You're going to have to figure that out. So, I'm going to provide a little bit of a wrap up here, and then I'd like to pause for some questions. And I would just, you know, kind of as I started out, maximizing the potential of engaging your audience, you need to understand these principles. And I hope I hammered that home today. Get familiar with what Lisa talked about. If you can't rattle them off, you need to learn a little, you need to, you know, get it in your head a little bit stronger. And then understand how to make nature work for you. See, and I'll just give you an example. You know, I constantly, when I have an issue with something, I think, you know, how would this work in nature? How does this work? Is there a way? And I just, my mind just keeps circling around. Sometimes I don't know. Sometimes I check with others, and eventually we figure something out. There are still a lot of things I am curious about. How far can we take this? I don't know, but it's a question I routinely ask. Now, one final thought here. I guess I have two final thoughts, but what will move the needle significantly for soil health principles to be adopted? We've come a long way. If you would have told me, you know, back in 1982, when I first started no-till, that where we're at today, I would have said, I wouldn't have believed it. But in the context of 2023, it feels like it's awfully slow, and I wish it could go faster. I wish more people could see the light. But what will move the needle? And here are two things that I've come up with, and this is in conversation with my peers. Number one, and I didn't talk about this a whole lot today, but if we can start connecting the soil health to human health, you hear me? Soil health to human health. We can start connecting that a little stronger, and it's a wide chasm yet, but it's coming closer. That could move the needle significantly. And the other thing is, and I say this with a little reservation, but government policy. And I would look at it not mandating this stuff, but I'm gonna take the other side here and say we need to have a healthy food policy. If any of the candidates that are running out there could come up with a healthy food policy, that's great, good for them. I just feel if we would do that, that could be helpful. And, we could talk about that all day too. But finally, it's the future. We all agree probably, but I think you can drop that once in a while to certain people you're talking to. Where is the future headed? Just ask that question in this context. Where is the future headed? Is it with more disturbance, less disturbance, more like nature, not like nature? I think we know the answer. And I'm a grandfather. I have 7 grandchildren. I mean, I've heard this been said, all my life, but once you're at the point I am now, you understand that I'm more concerned about my grandchildren now than I'm about my own next 30 years. Because, I'm pretty much set. I know what my big plans are. But what are they going to do? In the context, we're talking today about human health. And so that to me is where some of the, important things are that we need to have discussion points sometimes. So there you are, Ashley. That's what I have for today. Or sorry, I guess Amanda, you're moderating here. So if there's any questions, let's talk about them.
All right, folks can put their questions into the chat. In the meantime, we had one question for you, Lisa. Are you willing to share the slides that you had earlier? We do have this entire presentation recorded that we'll share out, but would you be willing to share your slides on top of that?
I'd be happy to share the slides, right? Because it's all about education, right? So the more folks that we have don't have to start from scratch and can build on what I've done. I also have a full 45-minute length soil health principle. So I'd be happy to even share my full slide deck versus just the shorter condensed version that we did today. But yep, we can get that out to them.
Great, thank you. So we'll follow up today's presentation and tomorrow's presentation for those who are joining us tomorrow as well, with the recording and any resources that were shared during the presentations. So again, pop any questions you might have into the chat so that we can share those. We do have plenty of time for some questions. Steve, I wanted to start with a question for you because I was taking notes furiously and really appreciate for both of you. Two of the best presentations I have seen in a long time. So thank you both. But Steve, you mentioned, you've been in this work for a long time and you've worked with a lot of mentors and such, and I'm sure you have been a mentor to some people. Could you kind of share with us any kind of anecdotal experience where you have really been successful in moving the needle on somebody's farm and getting them to go through that process of moving to soil health and what that looked like?
Well, probably my most, I'll just say who mentored me is a guy named Frederic Thomas from France. I've been over there 4 times. Him and his wife were just here for the second time 2 weeks ago here in the States. So, we kind of have we've developed a friendship over it. But what is really interesting, there's times when, and this has happened both ways, where I'll share an idea and he will say, "Oh, I'm already doing that." I'm like, crap, I thought I was on it, and then it works other ways too. So, but we have a little friendly, all these things and all this crazy stuff we talk about. It is, I will say, it's both satisfying and annoying to have people following you. because when you see some people who are just, they get it and they're just sincere and they try it right, and others who are just an antagonist. And I'm just being honest with you guys. I've had a couple people I said, I'm sorry, I just can't help you, because it's, I mean, for instance, for me, it was one guy, he had a garden. It was like, I finally asked him, how big is your garden? He said, oh, about 10 by 20 feet. And he was calling me every week. Well, I'm not a master gardener, you know, and it just, so I'm just sharing both sides of this here. So there are some people I've had to just say, you know, I don't think I'm their guy, for the kind of questions you're answering. So, but no, you know, some of the, I guess you say some of the crazier stuff is, you know, I made some pretty, I was in California in 1999. I was brought out there with the University of California at UC Davis. And I flew into Sacramento and drove 200 miles down to the southern part of the San Joaquin Valley to 5 Points. All I saw was brown fields. And if you ever drove down I-5 through there, you know what I'm talking about. At least, you know, when that was 20 years ago. I called him, told my wife, I don't know what I'm doing here. I was literally intimidated. 200 farmers show up, and I'm supposed to tell them to use cover crops and no-till. You know what? Went back there 5 years later, and I went to one of the same farms I was on, and I asked the question because they were starting to use cover crops. I said, how much water do you need to buy? Because they have to buy all their water to grow this cover crop. And they said, we have to buy about 6 inches. And I said, is that worth it? And he said, I'll show you. You got to shovel out, put it in the cover crop field and lifted it up, and you can see the moisture was still there. The cover crop had just been terminated like 2 weeks before. So he said, it's holding the moisture now. And then I made a casual comment. I said, oh, I see that little earthworm there in the bottom of the soil. And he looked at it, he goes, there's an earthworm. He's like, that's the first earthworm we've seen in this farm for 30 years. And the guy I was with, I said, is that true? He goes, probably. 4,000 acre farm. First earthworm in 30 years. Now I'm finding out that this is a phenomenon in California, and maybe other areas too, where there was no earthworms. When they start using cover crops and less tillage, the cocoons or something had to be alive in there because they didn't seed them, they didn't plant them. That was one of the most impactful moments of my soil health life, I'll say, where I was there. You would have thought, literally, you would have thought they hit the lottery. They were giddy that they saw a sign of life coming right out of their fields. So that's probably the best story I got for you, Ashley.
That's a good one. That's a really good one. I got a picture
to prove it as well. So anyway.
So in our go ahead, Lisa. Go ahead, Lisa.
I was just going to kind of build on what Steve said from what early on Ray Archuleta, right? So kind of godfather, NRCS godfather of soil health. But Steve, you know, when you mentioned going to California and who are you going to reach in that audience, right? And I remember Ray early on, 10 years ago, plus years, he's like, if I reach and resonate with 10% of the audience that I'm talking with, I consider that a success, right? And he knew the odds were against him, but again, folks need to hear things multiple times, right? So somebody that you're having the conversation with, maybe having this conversation or hearing these principles, hearing that message for the first time, it may not directly translate into management changes on the farm, but it plants the seed. Yep. So don't undervalue each conversation that you're having with somebody, because it's helping them along that journey, right? And they're going to move at different paces along those journeys. Some people are going to get it right away, but other people need time. And the more conversations, the more they hear folks talking about these things, that peer pressure, you know, that moving with the social norm can go a long way to making some impactful changes.
Awesome. We have a question in the chat, which I think we have 1 minute left to answer for both Steve and Lisa. What are your perspectives or advice on what services and programming our audience can provide to keep the experienced and advanced soil health farmer learning and growing? So Lisa, we'll start with you, and then Steve, we'll have you add that in.
All right.
I'm going to probably give a very biased answer that I alluded to earlier. Is I love digging into the biology side of it. And I think giving the farmers the confidence as they're on this journey, and those more advanced guys that have spent maybe 15, 20 years building up their system, like Steve said, giving them the confidence to start backing off on those inputs, right? And I think a service that we can provide is maybe trying to help them think through that on-farm trial research like that Steve encouraged, right? And giving them the support to do that, giving them the foundation, and kind of helping them track that progress, maybe through the growing season. So I think those guys that have been in the system, they're ready to start doing some of those on-farm trials and really start backing off, and seeing if they can make some big changes that way. But
some of the things that came to mind is if you ever have the advantage of having a rainfall simulator to show people what that does, just take advantage of that. That continues to be important. If you have an opportunity to do a soil pit at a field day. Now, don't do a soil pit unless you do know a little bit about what to look for, because it's pretty boring if you don't. It's very interesting if you know what to look for. So those are things that I remember I used to do field days every year, and we all send these questionnaires out. And after 20 years, we would still see that was one of the top parts of a field day, was a soil pit. But you got to have someone in there that knows what they're doing. And as Lisa said too, showing people taking a shovel out there, and most farmers don't have the time. It might be hard for you to understand, but I'm speaking as a farmer. Just to stop your pickup and get out and just to dig in the field for 2 minutes sometimes doesn't feel worth it. Now, I'm into this journey pretty heavily, and I'll do it, but most farmers won't. So always be, honoring farmers' times, of course. But there's other times where you can spend an hour or two there, depending on what their level of interest is. So having a shovel, I mean, I've jokingly said, but yet I'm kind of serious. If you that are actually consult with farmers, if you don't have a shovel in your car or pickup truck, you should be fired. It's a bold statement, but I'm just saying a shovel is a key tool to show what the difference is in soil. And it's again, you got to know what you're looking for. But so there's some of the things that came to mind, Ashley.
I think too, along that shovel line, Steve, the opportunity to dig some soil at the hedgerow or the field edge at the edge of the woods, to have that on-farm comparison.
Oh my!
To say,
a quick story. I was in Hungary, and I told them to dig soil pits the first year, and the second year they didn't do it. Second year they dug them for me, and I was in 6 different fields. Not one earthworm was found, and they said we don't have earthworms. I walked over to the fence row. 2 out of the 3 shovelfuls each had earthworms in. They couldn't believe it. Right under their feet, and they didn't know it. So, and again, just an interesting anecdotal story.
So we are over time. I think I could listen to you guys for more time, but totally worth it to go over for all of this information. So I want to say thank you to Lisa and Steve for joining us today. We will have a follow-up session tomorrow where you guys both set me up really well, because I'm going to be actually talking about rainfall simulators and how to make those dynamic demonstrations work. So we'll join us tomorrow for that, and we'll talk about kind of the specifics to engaging some of the audiences and getting a little bit more detailed, building off of what Lisa and Steve shared with us today. So again, thank you all so much. We'll share out this video and the slides, and you can register at the link that Amanda just shared in the chat, farmland.org/events. If you haven't registered to join us tomorrow, 9:30 Eastern time, in case we have any folks from the other parts of the country with us. But thank you all so much, and enjoy the rest of your day. Stay cool. Steve, don't farm too hard.
Right. Thank you.
Thanks all.
yeah. Bye, everyone.
Thanks so much, everyone.